Thanks for the opportunity. And since I met John Dane last year, I've been wanting to get more involved with TCD and this group and presenting at Tropilunch, and hopefully having a really good discussion together is a great way to do that. So I'm hoping that this technique that I'm sharing today can be useful in your work, and that we can all talk about ideas to expand some of what we've started here. I am a PhD student in Extension. AJ gave that introduction. I want to recognize Dr. Warner, Laura Warner, and Dr. Diaz, who were both collaborators on these projects in the water conservation in the US context and internationally, looking at journey mapping. So to start, I want to introduce this idea of social marketing and behavior change, and what, as practitioners, we are faced with when we look at convincing or promoting a new technology or behavior for an audience. So this is challenging, and social marketing is an area that takes techniques and ideas from commercial marketing, and you use them to look at new behaviors and ideas as products that would be better for the audience, society, and the environment, and trying to understand, sort of like you would look at customer preferences, you're looking at the audiences, their members' preferences, and trying to tailor your approach to that. One of the key challenges in this is understanding the behavior change process and understanding where people are in that behavior change process. So this trans-theoretical model here on the right is one tool or one model we can use to do this, where it proposes that people go through these stages as they are adopting a behavior or considering adopting a behavior. Before they're even thinking about it, they're in pre-contemplation. Once they start considering it and thinking about it, they're in contemplation. Then they start to prepare for the behavior change, taking measures to actually prepare. Action is when they're actually acting and they've started the behavior change, and maintenance is when it becomes longer term. They're actually going to do this over a long-term period. One thing I want to point out is this looks really clean cut and linear. That isn't truly the case with behavior change. And I should represent this more as sort of a cycle or a visual where you can see that people may enter one phase or go on to another and then revert back to another. So say they go into action, and this model is also used for addiction and other types of behaviors. Say someone stops using a certain substance, and then they revert back to using it. So they go back to another stage. But the same can happen in our types of behavior change here too. So the focus of today is journey mapping, which fits into a sort of social marketing approach. And journey mapping comes from commercial sectors. So it comes from marketing, and it's been used by companies to visualize a person's experience as they progress towards a goal, as they change a state of being. So I like to think of this, and I'm going to show you examples that help you understand this. Think about if you were looking for new headphones and you go online and you search for the headphones, you go through the process of comparing them, you go through the process of buying them, and then they're shipped to you. Throughout that journey, a company may want to track how you are feeling, the decisions you're making, and understand how that experience went for you. So what they're really going to look at that's pretty innovative is things like your emotions and data that could be hard to capture otherwise. And in those times, say when you're frustrated because you are overwhelmed with the number of headphones or something, or the price, that would be a point in your journey map where they'd want to understand, okay, why was that person frustrated? This is where we can intervene to improve their experience. So we wanted to look at how can we apply this kind of concept, this idea, in behavior change, and set up a way to look at this in our extension or change work. So we looked at the potential and applied this for residential water conservation, focused on residents in Florida, and also for smallholder farmers and their household dynamics, especially looking at gender in their adoption of fish farming, which has to do with my previous position before grad school. So before we hop into the work that we did on this, I want to show a few examples to help you kind of understand what this technique is and what journey mapping is. So this first one is a fairly standard journey map, but I like the way they map the experience here. But you look at these different stages, and I think this is someone buying or getting an online product. So they go from inquiring, they're looking into this product, then they're purchasing it, they're installing it, they're using it, and they're sharing it. You look at their actions at those different points. What are they doing? And then you look at their thoughts. What are they thinking at all of these different points? What I think is really innovative and cool here is that experience line and those colors you see there. Because what that's looking at is how they were feeling and this emotional experience for them. If you see that line across there, anything above the line tends to be more positive and anything below more negative. And that color wheel on the right there actually points out the different colors and what they mean, whether they're joyous or happy, or if they're red, maybe frustrated or angry with the experience. In this journey map, they point out the opportunities based on this journey map or this journey for how to intervene or how to improve that experience. And you can, as you would expect, in that red area is where they're really looking at how can we pinpoint what's happening to the person at these stages and improve that experience. Just to show you, there are a variety of ways journey mapping has been applied. In this case, it's different in mapping that experience, but that line still represents more positive versus negative experiences. This doesn't quite have as many data fields. One thing that's interesting is kind of moments of truth, this bottom row here, and that's looking at sort of epiphanies. What are the big takeaways at these points, and why are they significant for us looking at this journey? And before we jump into our work with journey mapping, here's a more general template of how you could construct a journey map and the different types of data collection and the stages, how you could construct this. You can see this emotions, for example, they used emojis, and you see all different kinds of ways that people construct the emotions part of their journey maps. In touch points, let me point that out. What touch points tend to be are sort of summaries of the key points of everything above. So as you're analyzing each stage, your touch points could be those key takeaways. Journey maps often have that. So I want to share how we did this and how you may be able to do this in your own work. So let's go on and build a journey map. So if you're not super familiar with a sticky wall, and I'm sure a lot of you are, it's a pretty great tool to use for facilitation because you apply adhesive material to the entire wall, and then people can stick different colors, and it's a participatory way to engage people in your data collection. So we used a sticky wall, and we created the journey mapping template for our participants. And we actually used those stages of behavior change, the pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And at each one of those stages, everything was color-coded. We wanted to look at what were people doing, describing their activities, their thoughts and decisions, their emotions, and insights. What were some key takeaways for them? And this one was used for water conservation, looking at people's journey to conserving water in their landscapes. And I'll share that after I share another example with you here in a moment. So how to facilitate this? Here is the process in action. In this case, this is Dr. Warner and I pasting the data on the board for them, for their journey. Part of this was we had an older group of people that didn't want to really be moving around the room a ton. But in a lot of cases, it's a lot of fun for everyone to be moving around and engaging in this process. And so yeah, people are filling out at the different cards, we're walking them through it, and we're doing each stage one at a time and verifying back, okay, how does this align with what you were thinking? And we did this with a small group, I think it was 3 or 4, but doing this with too many people could be really difficult, and you would struggle with being able to visualize the data in a meaningful way. So be creative, make it fun. I think one of the really cool things about this is that emotions piece. And when we were thinking about how do we test this and apply this, we asked people to draw how they felt at these different stages. They could also write, but actually drawing those faces was a lot of fun. And we saw some cool things about how are you feeling at this stage in your behavior change journey. So think about ways that could be done in your case as well. So now really switching gears to how we applied this and giving you an example so you can also look at the content in addition to the process for our discussion. So before coming to grad school, I was coordinating extension in West Africa for the Scaling Up Aquaculture Production Project that looked at increasing fish production and consumption for small-scale farmers in West Africa. We also, what's important here is we had a gender strategy that was used to support these objectives, but to look at how can we transform social relations and look at social relations with these households in addition to our technical areas. And all of the pictures here, I had permission to share, and they were ones that I took or some that I'm actually in. So applying journey mapping, in this case, we wanted to look at how we can learn from other sectors, especially commercial sectors, and use journey mapping as a participatory monitoring and evaluation technique. How can we actually engage farmers and households in this process and use journey mapping? And we wanted to look at the extension programs for this fish farming, their technical and their social interventions through this visual journey with smallholder farmers, looking at actions, decisions, feelings at key stages and how that relates to outcomes here. So let's dive into how we would construct this example. So if we think about intra-household gender dynamics, we want to look at a journey map and understand how that might impact harvests or outcomes for the households. So think about when you're on a project like this, you often have more technical minded people, and then you have more social focused people. And it was often almost working in silos and not together on these objectives. And we were thinking, okay, a journey map may help us to bring together the technical and the social components of this project and the technical and social work. So if we can construct this journey and look at whether social changes actually impact or improve technical outcomes, that could be pretty cool to see and important for this project. So the next thing we wanted to do was define our stages. In this case, we are abbreviated for today. And the 3 stages of our journey map will be pre-interventions before the project started working with the farmers and looking at fish farming as an opportunity, and in the gender strategy intervention. The second stage is changes and action. That's where people are actually starting to implement these changes and going about the trainings and the process of fish farming, looking at the gender trainings and going through that. That's the thick of it. Then we have the last stage, which is where we see the fruits of all the labor, of all the work, the harvest and the post-harvest. So we're going to look at these 3 stages. Ideally in this journey map, and we just show one example for today, but we would want to select households with different harvest outcomes, we were thinking, but with similar sized ponds. So they're doing this freshwater fish farming, but if we look at households that say have really big harvests compared to other households that have smaller harvests, but they have the same size pond, we may be able to pinpoint why that is based on these journeys. And finally, we want to look at this relationship between technical decisions and social dynamics. I just talked about that. Okay, jumping right into this first phase of the journey map, or the first stage, which is pre-interventions. And at this stage, what we see is that fairly traditionally, the household is receiving extension from the ministry, and the gender roles are quite traditional, that the wife is taking care of children and vegetable farming. The husband is rice farming, and income is being prioritized to send the son to school. That's what's kind of happening for doing. The thinking could be that rice and vegetable farming is hard work and little return. For subsistence farmers, this could be the case. Also thinking, if you talk to the whole family, I wish we could pay for school fees for all of the children instead of just prioritizing the son in this case. Feeling, this could make some sense that they're worried or they're unaware and asleep. We're kind of at the before stage, so it's hard to know what could be before you're doing it. So unaware and asleep, or worried about things like the productivity of the farm, or not having enough income in some cases. And then touch points is summarizing all of this. Like I said, subsistence level production, traditional gender roles, and the school fees being prioritized for the son. Now we go into the changes in action stage. This is when they're starting to work with the project. They're looking at technical trainings, pond construction and stocking. And we're also implementing, my colleague Binta, who's amazing here, was doing this gender household methodology. If you haven't heard of this, where she works with the household to actually visualize their goals together. The whole household discusses it, and sort of how the benefits will be distributed. And this helps people to start reconsidering gender roles and shifting some of those. And in this case, when we look at thinking, they say that they want to try fish farming. They want to devote a small portion of the swamp to fish farming instead of rice. And they decide they will work together, that they're going to do this as a family. So that could have been through that household methodology that they decided that. So feeling, we see that they're determined and hopeful and excited now, that they may see potential, and they're excited to be embarking on this new project. So finally, touch points summarize all of that, the technical and gender trainings, and the starting jointness, working together, seeing what the outcomes of that are. And these are actual pictures from our work in Sierra Leone. So I'll be happy to discuss anything about the intervention or the work there, or this process as well. So we go to the last stage, which is harvest and post-harvest. This is where we look at those benefits and what comes from all this work. And we see a pretty good harvest. In this case, they're harvesting 150 kilograms of tilapia, fresh tilapia. They're marketing and consuming the fresh fish locally, and they're making decision-making together on, they're doing decision-making together on income use and their future plans for fish farming. So they have this income. How are they going to use it in the future? What could this be used for? At this point, there could be some thinking about fish farming is more profitable than rice farming. So they're considering maybe this is a good thing to do. Some of our time and agricultural resources could be devoted towards this. I'm glad we worked together to carefully manage the pond, and some wanted another pond in some cases. There's a picture here after the first cycle. This woman was getting her first official loan from a bank, a micro loan, to embark in more fish farming. So we see feeling, what more can we do? They're feeling better about things. We see some optimism here, and those touch points summarizing that, and seeing that we see some improvements in gender equity. So I know that was quite a bit to go through, but summarizing some of that, we can look at these farmers' different journeys and understand potentially how different factors and decisions are influencing the outcomes. So for example, I think one of the most fascinating ones is comparing a household that participated in that gender intervention to one that did not, and looking at whether that joint decision-making influenced outcomes. Did they have a bigger harvest because men, women, maybe even the children or youth are working together? And research does suggest that jointness, togetherness, can lead to actual better technical or economic outcomes. So I am all about participation, engaging, and looking at the farmers as co-researchers in this process. And not only to learn about their own journey, but also to build their capacities to monitor and evaluate their own projects and their own endeavors in the future, and gain some gender awareness through that based on who's doing what in that kind of conversation. So I'm not going to go through this full journey, but I wanted to also talk about how we use this for residential water conservation. So we wanted to look at this issue of residents way overwatering their lawns in the US, but especially this is an issue in Florida, and try to map the behavior change journey from pre-contemplation to starting to conserve water using smart irrigation technologies and actually conserving water. So I'm going to show you just an overview of this journey and talk about some key takeaways here. So this is a lot. And for the fish farming example, I went through each stage, but this is the entire journey map put together for this example for residential water conservation. And we did this a little differently with the stages. So in this case, we used that trans-theoretical model and actually looked at pre-contemplation up to maintenance of these behavior changes. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just want to point out a few interesting things. So when you go to pre-contemplation, before they've even had this in their mind, people are thinking there's so much water in Florida. Why would I even need to embark on this water conservation stuff? I see water everywhere. This is a misconception. We should know that fresh water is scarce in Florida, and so this was an area of opportunity to kind of shift that idea that we have abundant water in Florida and water conservation isn't an issue. So then we get to contemplation and they start to realize that there are a lot of people moving to Florida. There are a lot of houses by these water supplies, and this may be an issue I need to think about. But how do I begin? What do I even do? Then finally, preparation. What I think is really cool here is people start to reach out and they find that other people are thinking the same or interested in this issue. So this quote from someone says, "I'm no longer approaching this in a vacuum. There are lots of like-minded folks like me." So they're kind of excited and they see that social support. Then we move on to action and maintenance, and we see that not only are they starting to change their own behaviors, they're influencing neighbors. So this is one of our goals in behavior change. Once you have this better practice for water conservation, that it can start diffusing and influencing others around them. So they're happy to be helping others and to be influencing others. So key takeaways were that people in this group that we collected data from started with individual reflection, starting to challenge their ideas that there's so much water in Florida, to then getting support and motivation in groups of adopters. So that social support seems key here, that they're not in a vacuum anymore, that others can help them on this behavior change journey. And then encouraging non-adopters, that we see that diffusion beyond this group to others. So if you're interested, what we saw was overall a big transition towards less time and labor burden in the selection of technologies that people were using. And we looked at adopters here, but we thought it would be really interesting to look at non-adopters and look at try to define those stages and look at what was influencing them along the way to not conserve water or to use certain landscape practices. So to wrap up here, I want to go over just some broad conclusions and recommendations here. And what we see here, and here's a picture of grad students. We were piloting this tool, and you can see they're really interacting and having fun doing this. But practitioners can analyze trends and touch points and identify barriers and opportunities to design and adjust approaches based on these journey maps. So you may see that social intervention, that social support is a key area for behavior change. So if you're promoting water conservation as a practitioner, targeting where that social support can come from would be really important. The journey map can capture important data missed by other evaluations. So consider that a big quantitative major evaluation may miss some of these micro level personal experiences that people face. So maybe a journey mapping could be done before that evaluation to figure out some areas to include, or it could be done with that and kind of compare and contrast those findings. Use culturally and context appropriate techniques. This is really important to make sure that if literacy varies, if people's ability to move around the room or to participate is an issue, make sure you're adjusting your methods, maybe more visuals, maybe you're posting the data for them in this case. And then finally, we're really interested, and we haven't done this, but we're interested in ways to facilitate virtual journey mapping. So I'd be interested in whether any of you have ideas of how this could be done virtually or other ways to facilitate journey mapping. So finally, we do have a resource. If you are interested in this in behavior change, I will drop the link to this article in the chat. And yeah, so if you want to learn more about this process and some of the background, you can check out this article here. And in that, there's also a worksheet. And with that worksheet, you can look at kind of designing a basic journey map and practicing this or using this before you really implement this with your audience. So with that, thank you all. And I know we have a smaller group, but I did want to open up for questions, any reflections on this, and ideas based on how this could be applied. This is still emerging stuff, and I think there's potential to learn from all of you too. So thanks so much.